Project Pegasus, under the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, was the U.S. time-space program at the time of its emergence in the mid to late 1960s. I was initially brought into Project Pegasus by my late father, Raymond F. Bashaga, who was a special projects engineer for the Ralph M. Parsons Company, which was the principal U.S. defense contractor involved in Project Pegasus. Sometime between September of 1967 and 68, he took me up to the old Curtiss-Wright Aeronautical Company facility in Wood Ridge, New Jersey. And there in Building 68 was a Tesla teleporter. It basically consisted of two gray-colored parenthesis-shaped booms that were called armatures, between which was broadcast a shimmering curtain of radiant energy. And my father explained that when we jumped through that field of energy, we would enter a tunnel in time-space, and when that tunnel closed several seconds later, we would find ourselves somewhere else in the country. And so we jumped through that field of energy, and we found ourselves in something that looked like a bluish-white tunnel, such as people report in the near-death experience. We were clearly moving at a great rate of speed, but also there was a sense that we weren't moving at all, that the universe was being wrapped around us. And when the tunnel closed, we found ourselves in the location where we were teleporting to for really the next 5 years, which was Santa Fe, New Mexico. The state capitol grounds at Santa Fe were being used by Project Pegasus as the collection area for people who were teleporting into New Mexico from different teleports around the country. And then I was brought officially into Project Pegasus in the fall of 1969, which for me was the beginning of the third grade. I was 7 and then quickly turned age 8 around the time that I signed basically a loyalty oath on Defense Department letterhead. That was in approximately early October of 1969, shortly after we know the lunar landing of July 20th, 1969. And for the next 3 years, in real time, I was involved in a range of time travel activities under the aegis of DARPA that Project Pegasus was then involved in. Everything from conventional remote viewing of distant targets in real time, which is a form of psychic time travel, all the way to through the form of physio-virtual time travel that chronovisors allow, where you're immersed in a hologram and you find yourself in a past or future location, all the way through various forms of physical time travel, such as Tesla teleportation and other methodologies that were being developed to bodily teleport somebody to another location in time-space. So in real time in New Jersey, I was involved in Project Pegasus for those 3 years, fall of '69 to the end of the summer of 1972. But when we factor in the fact that teleportation was being used to teleport us from New Jersey to New Mexico, that we were then spending time there involved in project activities and teleporting back to the afternoon of the day we had left, what ended up happening is that 3 additional summers of experience were embedded into those years. And those were the summers of 1971, of 1973, accessed from 1971, and then summer of 1972. So I actually gained an additional 9 months of experience, of life experience, as a result of the 3 time loops that were effectuated using Tesla teleportation between New Mexico and then back to New Jersey.
So does this take us through basically from 1968 to 73, just sort of the overall experience without getting into the details of that program?
Well, yes, between that initial jump that we know took place in the 1967-68 timeframe, because when we met with Dr. Harold M. Agnew, who was then the director of the Weapons Division at the Los Alamos National Labs, and my father presented his prospectus to involve U.S. civilians, including adults and children, in the teleportation experiments that were then going on. Dr. Agnew asked me, and he asked my father my name, and we both said 6. So that teleporting and that meeting with Agnew had to have happened between September of 1967 and September of 1968. So we know that teleportation utilizing these types of Tesla devices was already operational by 1967-68. And it was in the context of Project Pegasus that I was involved in other time probes using different technologies during those years. So really the emphasis between 1968 and 72 in real time was Tesla teleportation. We were being trained and showed how to be acclimated to and comfortable jumping through vortal tunnels in time-space. The other major emphasis of the project during those years were the chronovisors, which propagated holograms of past and future events that we were either looking at to gather intelligence about non-local events or that we were immersed in, whereby we were then relocated to those positions in time-space.
You mentioned that in Project Pegasus you were quantum displacing or time traveling using Tesla technology to different destinations. And I'd like to go through a number of those, and if you could describe those and state why you think it was that you in fact time traveled or displaced from one from one location in a time-space hologram to another. The first one is to a dinosaur scene, a scene of the dinosaur time.
Right. Well, of course, in Project Pegasus, during those years, which was roughly 1968 to 72 in real time in New Jersey, we were being trained in different time travel technologies, the two major ones being the Tesla teleporter and then the chronovisor of Ernetti, Gemelli, and Fermi. The chronovisor being not a teleporter, but a device that propagated a moving color hologram of a past or future event that when we looked at the hologram, it was essentially a looking glass in which we could see a past or future event going on. However, there was a paradox, and that was that if we stood on the stage of the chronovisor while the hologram was brought in around us, we subjectively experienced going to that past time and place, at least on what I call a physio-virtual basis. In other words, on a basis that included both physical aspects and virtual aspects. But because I had performed ably and well in Project Pegasus for the 3 years that I was officially enrolled, when I was in New Mexico living with my father in the summer of 1972, he invited his longtime friend, Mary Constance Chavez, who was known as Connie or to her friends as Pilly Chavez, who was a native Albuquerque resident who had grown up actually in Old Town Albuquerque and was from a prominent Spanish-American family. In fact, her cousin Dennis Chavez was arguably the most prominent senator in the history of New Mexico. So her immediate, one of her brothers, an elementary school in Albuquerque was named for. So Connie was from a prominent Albuquerque family and was almost a folkloric figure in terms of being an employee of the La Hacienda and La Placita restaurants, which were the two most popular Mexican restaurants in all of New Mexico during those years and still are. So I had extensive interaction with Connie. She was essentially my mother away from home when I was spending time in New Mexico after teleporting there as a child attached to Project Pegasus. So my father had the opportunity to invite several people to a screening of a 20 to 30 minute black and white documentary film, again the 16mm documentary film stock of that era. And there were about, this was at the Sandia National Labs outside of Albuquerque where Connie lived and worked. And there were about maybe 15 of us, all of us attached to work that was then going on at the labs in some way. And we watched as the film captured a hologram of the crucifixion of Jesus. And as a child who had taken First Communion and was attending Sunday school at a local Benedictine Catholic parish in Cedar Knolls, New Jersey, Notre Dame of Mount Carmel Church, I certainly could identify that everything that happened in that 20 to 30 minutes of film was consistent with the accounts of the crucifixion of Jesus that are found in the New Testament. Jesus, in the images, was crucified with nails having been driven into his wrists and pinning one foot over the other. He was on about a 14-foot pole that was about as thick as a contemporary telephone pole. There was a placard above his head that said INRI. He was wearing a crown of thorns that was very full and was very jagged and had been pushed on top of his head, causing rivulets of blood to have streamed down his forehead and cheeks. He was a Caucasian male with a sort of an aquiline nose and a thin, gaunt face who was in extreme pain. His mouth was agape. He had a very bushy, dark brown beard and long hair, and a very emaciated body type. He was approximately, I would say, about 5'10", but very thin. And the events that were going on around him that we could see, and actually in separate images, the images were strobing, as if the chronovisor had tapped different locations around Jesus' cross, included women coming and praying at the foot of his cross before being driven out of the area by Roman centurions. I remember seeing what must have been Longinus holding the end of his spear and leaping up to pierce Jesus' side, which is consistent with the biblical account. The sky grew dark at one point. So, from the perspective of a Catholic Sunday school participant, what had been recorded apparently was consistent with what had been recorded in the different New Testament accounts of the crucifixion. When we left the screening, my dad turned to Connie Chavez and said, "Connie, I don't know why you're reacting like this." She had been just squirming out of her seat. She couldn't watch it. She was covering her eyes at one point, sometimes looking through her fingers. And she turned to my father and said, "Ray," she was a very devout Catholic who was always helping the nuns there at the San Felipe de Neri Church in Old Town Albuquerque. And she said, "Ray, they were crucifying my Lord. How do you expect me to act?" And he said, "I know, Connie, but we also have images." He said, "My team retrieved images that 3 days later, there's a flash of light in Jesus' crypt, 2 angels appear, Jesus stands up, and all 3 of them push the stone away, and Jesus walks out of his crypt." And she said, "You're kidding, Ray." And he says, "No, we also have images of the resurrection of Jesus." Now, I don't say that to proselytize, but just to share what I experienced in that setting. Now, that begs the question of what was being accessed by a chronovision that led to the production of that film. It was either the actual crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth, or it was the actual imagery of another European male of his age and general appearance among the 600 men fitting that description who were crucified by the Roman Empire around the time that Jesus of Nazareth was, or it was a synthetic recording of the crucifixion of Jesus or another man that was stored somewhere.